Okay, folks, the second part of the main event. We have Frank Manning in the studio. Frank is a friend. He is a great attorney. I have used him myself, and I am not afraid to send people and refer people to Frank. He's a judge and an attorney who counseled well over 2,500 people over the years. He's been a frequent guest on our show, and we're delighted to have him back. And I'm just telling him off microphone that he said one of the most popular videos, and that video was about protecting your secret sauce. And we're gonna maybe make that a little bit more prominent on the site and send it to him. So, Frank, thanks for coming today.
Well, thanks for having me. I appreciate coming.
Let's talk a little bit about the do's and the don'ts of starting a company legally. How do people protect themselves? Well,
your prior guest, Ed Paulson, brought up a lot of things that are really important as far as planning a business in advance. And in my experience and the work that I do, I get people who come in who have planned their business. They've created a business plan, et cetera. But my experience, by and large, is that true entrepreneurs don't do the formalized planning. They more often than not have a passion for something, whatever it may be, or an opportunity or a skill set, and they dive into that. Or maybe they start a business without realizing sometimes they've actually started a business.
Whoa. Would you run that by me one more time?
Real estate is often a place where people go, they end up with
I see.
And they don't recognize the fact that they're in a business.
They're in a business.
They're renting a property. It's a business. It might have been mom or dad's home they received through an estate, but it's a formalized business, and there are things they need to do to protect themselves.
Gotcha.
So the entrepreneur has a passion and a spirit, and when they show up in my office, I go down the checklist, and it's many of the things that Ed mentioned, at least a couple of them that he mentioned. I'm sure they're all covered in his book. What I immediately ask people when they come in, and I find out that they're in business, but they haven't really had a conversation with anybody, is, do you have the three wise men involved in your business? Do you have your accountant? Do you have your lawyer? Do you have your banker? And these aren't people that need to be on a payroll in a formalized fashion. These are people that you can identify by name in conversation with me, that if you have a question or a challenge in the course of your business conduct, you can pick up the phone and quickly ask a question of. And the reason for that is, and my advice to them is, anytime you're not, if you make cupcakes for a living, by way of example, and you're making cupcake, and then one day somebody walks in and says, hey, you want to buy a building? That's not a cupcake. That's not what your business is. You need to then bring your advisors in, bring in the three wise men, talk to them, figure that out.
I like the three wise men. I like that.
Well, it's simple.
So
but
true.
Yeah. Anybody who's been in business for more than 2 years can identify those three people in their business. It's the new ones, the people new to business, who think that they have to pay money every time they talk to an accountant or a lawyer, and it's simply not the case.
Well, and I understand that, but I think you and I have talked about this before. I think a lot of us make a mistake if we don't spend a few bucks to go to an attorney right from the beginning to make sure we do it right. It's like the old Pennzoil commercial, you're going to pay now or you're going to pay later. Oh, yeah. And you usually pay a heck of a lot more later than you pay now.
Yeah, I think a couple of times on the show we've had that conversation. Yeah. And the quick example is that 80% of my files are corporate clients that I advise in advance of transactions or advise on a regular basis. And 20% are litigation, people that ran into a problem or being sued or suing. But when you look at revenue...
You must love that when somebody calls you and say, hey, help.
Yeah, that's an emergency situation. Yeah. There's premium dollars involved. Yeah. And 80% of the revenue comes from litigation and 20% comes from planning. It's the 80-20, the Pareto principle.
Wow.
But it's there. And that the little bit of planning, or having someone who you can pick up the phone, have a quick conversation, who knows you, knows your business, knows the players. There's so much value associated with that. And what you and I have discussed also in the past is, if it isn't worth spending $500 on a lawyer to sit down and go over something, if the transaction or deal you're considering, it has that thin a margin, don't do the deal to begin with.
Sure.
I mean, that's way too razor thin a margin for you to really consider it.
Yeah.
And those are kind of rules of thumb. When people are, you're working hard in your business and you're developing it and you're new to it and you're encountering all kinds of new stuff, you try to come up with bright line rules for people. And these are some of the bright line rules that I try to establish, or at least provide folks so they have some guidance. So they know, light goes on, wait a second, this isn't a cupcake, maybe we should get somebody on the phone. And it just kind of slows them down, creates a little bit of white space so they can have a little time to make good decisions and plan their business. And, of course, there's nothing that's more frustrating, and I have to throw this out there, than someone walking in my office, throwing a contract on my desk and saying, hey, I just signed this. Can you look at it?
It's a little late, hey?
I said, why? Why bother? Let's wait to see if it blows up, and then you can pay me then.
I can understand that. I think that I've sent you a couple of clients that were buying businesses, if I remember correctly. It wasn't a huge purchase, but they were buying businesses. And in that particular case, you have to have some attorney and accountant and maybe even the banker, the three wise men. You've got to have them on your side.
You got to have advisors, particularly in that situation. And that's really common in today's world right now. And that we're in a moment in time where there are many people out there looking to acquire businesses. Either they're expanding a current business and they don't want to grow organically, they want to make a financial acquisition, or there are people out there with cash that have been sitting on the sideline who want to put it to work. And that's really, I get probably 2 calls a month from people looking to buy businesses.
Wow. Okay.
And anytime you do that, if you're approached and you're considering selling your business, you need to get your ducks in a row. You can have the initial conversations, but you're going to have non-disclosures and non-competes and et cetera, and you are playing a fool's game if you go through that process without your advisors on your hip, because it's too easy to make big mistakes that sometimes are irreversible. And
maybe 60 years ago you could do it on your own, but the things are complicated today. There's a lot of rules and regulations and a lot of government intervention, and I don't mean most of it's good, I'm sure, to protect people, but you got to have somebody that understands that. You might know your business, but you might know the ancillary effects of the business either.
And the other side of that, and I agree with you, that's well put, and I think the other side to that is if you're selling your business, you're not going to get a second chance to sell your business. This is it. This is the one-shot deal. So you got to make sure your ducks in a row, your people are aligned, you understand that this may be the best opportunity or your only opportunity, and evaluate it in a truly objective fashion, because you're not going to build another business in a year and sell that one off too. Great, it would be great if you could, but it doesn't work that way. It takes years and years and years to build businesses.
Yeah. I sold mine after 22 years, so you're absolutely right.
It's like losing a family member at that point.
It is, but there are a lot of reasons to sell a business, and markets might change. But in my case, quite honestly, I was just burned out. I just was tired of going up against these $2 billion companies, and it was not easy. And to have a good attorney on your side is good.
And that's a great point. I know we got to go on a break. I'd like to come back and touch on that just ever so briefly, and then we can move on, because fatigue, business fatigue, that's a big reason for people to sell, and there's some issues involving that.
No question about it. It could be age, it could be fatigue. There's a lot of things. Folks, I got to take a quick break. You're listening to Entrepreneurs Club Radio. We are WELW, celebrating 50 years of serving our community with integrity on 1330 AM. Are back. This is Kip Marlow, host of Entrepreneurs Club Radio, and we're with Frank Manning, and a local attorney in Mentor, Ohio, who has counseled well over 2,000 people over the years, including a lot of them small business owners. He counsels people to start companies. He gives them advice, looks over contracts to make sure they're good, negotiates contracts. The guy knows what he's doing. And we were talking a little bit about business fatigue at the end of the last segment. So do you want to talk about that?
Well, it was interesting. You had mentioned that you had 22 years in the surgical industry and surgical instrument industry, and you just got tired of it, and that's one of the things that I'm, as I had mentioned, there's money in the marketplace now to buy businesses, and I'm approached on a regular basis because people recognize this is the world I'm in. I sit on boards for profit and nonprofit businesses, and I advise them at all kinds of different levels. Being a former accountant, I bring more than just the legal to the business. But when people find themselves in a moment where they don't know what else to do with their business and they want to get out or they're not sure how they want to manage it, that's a time to take a step back and then bring in the three wise men again, or bring in your advisors.
Or at least two wise men.
Two wise men, yeah, that's right. Yes. And have somebody take a fresh look at the business, because if you're thinking about taking it to market, it isn't as easy as simply putting an ad in the paper, business for sale, bring your checkbook. I think there are some simple things that take a little bit of time to put into place that'll help the business owner really get the value from the business that A, they think they deserve, and B, the market will bear. And it isn't as easy necessarily as just taking it to market because, quite honestly, I've run a couple of small businesses. I have them myself, and I don't do all the reporting. I don't have all the checks and balances in place because they're my businesses and I'm running them. But if I take it to the market, and particularly if I'm a little fatigued, a little worn out on the industry, I'm maybe shortcutting the objective measures and the documentation that others would like to see in order to truly place a value on what it is I'm selling. And so when you mentioned that, it tripped a trigger in my head because I've been having a lot of these conversations with business owners. Yeah. So there are steps to be taken. There are people to bring to the table when you find yourself in that moment.
Well, I guess you had just hit something that triggered me, and you talked about preparing your company to be sold. And what we tried to do years ago was, make sure all our contracts were in line. We tried to make sure, in other words, they were, valid and apropos for the company, not just something put on paper and signed without an attorney looking at them. Make sure your gross profit margins are in line. We actually targeted the company that was going to buy us. I mean, I targeted the company that was going to buy us. I knew they were going to buy us. They didn't at the time, but I knew they were going to buy us.
Good strategy.
And so they were a public company, so you looked at their gross profit margins, you looked at their inventory turns because it's all there. When it's a public company, they're naked out there. You can find out anything you need to know. Probably more so today than ever before. So I got a couple of questions for you. How do you protect your family?
Well, in a business world, the first thing you do is you treat it like a business. You got to go in and you got to incorporate or create an entity. You create another entity that you work under, and not only just create the entity, but you name the entity. You're coming up with a proper name, not a 5-word name. 5-word names always get shortened.
Yes.
And if you're going to shorten your 5-word name to 2 words, make sure you've reserved that name also for your business.
I see.
Big problem that people run into. They come up with Silver Screen Submarine Band, but they call it the band. And they didn't preserve the name of the band, but they got the longer name, but they don't put it on it.
Do you mean preserve it for a website or something like that?
Or the Secretary of State's office, so it's tied into the legal entity.
Yeah. I see what you mean. Okay,
Not just the marketing standpoint, but the legal.
I see.
The band would be tied into the International Silver Screen Submarine Band, which is at the Secretary of State in Ohio, in this instance, office. And then the band is also a registered trade name of that entity. So in your cards and your contracts and everything else you do, say just the band. If somebody does a search for the band, they're going to find out what the entity behind it is. And that's really important, and it's a simple step that people often forget. And so there's no sense in incorporating if you don't make sure that everything has the proper business name on it.
And if you have an attorney that understands that, they will ask you that anyway. They'll make sure you do it.
Oh, absolutely.
And that's the whole key behind this, is to, spend a couple of bucks. It's not a lot of money.
It shouldn't be.
Spend a couple of bucks to make sure all the T's are crossed and the I's are dotted. Did I say that right?
Yeah, I think you do.
Because sometimes I do that opposite. So here's another thing I wanted to talk about, and you and I have talked about it here on the air from time to time. So many times kids get out of college, they've got a roommate, and they're going to start a business together. And 99% of the time, it just doesn't work out. Mm-hmm. I was speaking, in fact, somebody else Mario Jersic, and I were speaking to a class at a college that was taking an entrepreneurship course, and one of the ladies, a couple of them already started companies, and one of the ladies there said, "Now, should I have a partner?" And I turned to Mario, and he said, "Partners are for dancing."
I like Mario.
So, do you agree with that?
Yes. A strategic partner, fantastic. But if you're going to have a partner, I have a partner in a couple of different businesses, but we have an expression that I freely use, and it's good fences make good neighbors. Mm-hmm. You have bright line responsibility designations. You have bright line exit strategies. You have bright line division of profit and losses. And you don't take any of this for granted. Your partner doesn't have to be a dear friend, and chances are when the business is all said and done and you roll it up, they won't be. So you protect yourself on the front end. I just had some people in my office recently, at least one of 3 partners own a business, and I told them in the very first meeting, and this woman reminded me of this. I said, when this is all said and done, if you guys are still talking to each other, you've done a fantastic job. None of them are talking to each other 6 years later and it's just tough. It's tougher than people think it is. You can romanticize the profits, romanticize the vacations. What you can't romanticize is the long nights and the narrow margins and the stress. And that's why the bright line test, the good fences make good neighbors. You can have partners. Sometimes they're critical and you can't do the business without them. Just take those extra steps to put things in place.
I had some stockholders, and so I guess they were partners.
Yes, they are.
And when things were going very well, there was no problem between us.
They loved you. They loved you. You're a great guy, Kip.
I was
a great guy that Kip is.
I was the greatest manager and leader in the world.
Brilliant.
And it got to the point, too, where a lot of the people said, look what we've done.
Yes.
But then when things got a little dicey, it was like, it's his fault. I can't believe he did this. You know what I mean?
Oh, yeah.
And you find that, at least I found that, the people with spouses that went home, the spouses were some of the worst critics of the guy or the girl that runs the company. So we only have a minute left. Have you seen that?
Oh yeah, I had this is a true story. I've had 3 guys come into my office. They wanted to buy a business together. They all currently work somewhere else, and I had all the dialogue that we're having and much more. And my parting comment to them was, "Okay, guys, now each of you needs to go home and talk to your wife and make sure they're completely at peace with risking this money." And they all looked at me like I had a square head all of a sudden. And I said, "Guys, we'll set up a meeting for next week to follow up on this stuff, yada, yada, yada." The next week, 2 guys came back. I said, "What happened?" They said, "The other guy's wife said, no way, we're out of here."
Good.
And because your wife is your partner, so she's a wholly owned.
Frank Manning, Manning-law.com. Thanks for being here, sir. We'll be right back with Diane Helbig.